give you something to leave here with in a positive vein and to continue. So very briefly, Dr. Linda Teplin is from Northwestern University, an extraordinary woman long before most of us were engaged. She started a longitudinal study on the effects of detention in juveniles. That was a over 20-year study?
It's still going on.
It's still going on, okay? And what is equally amazing, when I first heard her speak, and that has been like over 20 years ago, I was just dumbfounded at the wealth of knowledge and what could be gleaned from her research. Just recently, Dr. Teplin was awarded a first-of-its-kind grant to now study the offspring of her original study group. So she will be studying children of formerly incarcerated youth. Their children now at the ages between 12 and 15.
The children that we're studying,
yes,
we've chosen to study between 12 and 15.
Right. So that should be fascinating. Our other panelists, they want to see the slides, so they're not up here. And I will introduce them sort of conjointly, Brad Stolback and Candace Norcott. And they work hands-on, day-to-day, directly with traumatized youth, and they will tell you more about their individual work. Brad Stolback, who seems to think that I am the consigliere for his clients. But that's what I love. He calls and says, I got a kid, he's in my group, can you help? And that's what we try to do, is work together to do that. But he has developed a very engaging and innovative program, and I think the title says it all, you know, hurt people hurt people. And Dr. Norcott does a more individualized practice, working directly with adolescent trauma victims and their involvement and engagement, and has lots of insights to offer us, again, about what we can do to help our children become better. So our final panel, what works and next steps.
Thanks so much, Herschela. It's a pleasure to be here. Although I have fewer solutions, but rather more detail on the problems, and especially the plight of youth in the juvenile justice system after they leave detention. In the prior panel, I presented findings on what they looked like when they entered detention, so that 3/4 of the girls, 2/3 of the boys have one or more psychiatric disorders. 80% have been physically abused. About half of the girls have been sexually abused. Right now, I will be piggybacking off that panel to show you what happens to these youth after they leave. So let me give you just a little bit of information, only slightly repetitive, from the last panel on our research. Our study is called the Northwestern Juvenile Project. And I joke, it is not the best longitudinal study of youth in detention. It is truly the only one. And that's because researchers tend to focus on who becomes delinquent, so that most researchers focus on general population kids to look at who ends up becoming delinquent. And the few studies that focused on delinquent kids look mostly at recidivism. And so we decided to approach it very differently and focus especially on mental health needs and outcomes. So let me tell you a little bit about our study and how it worked. We took a random sample of kids as they entered the... Oh, what's happening?
Just put the slides up.
Oh, thank you. The wonders of modern technology. So we took a random sample of youth when they entered detention in Cook County. So why did we decide to study Cook County? Several reasons. Number one, it's a typical big city with typical big city problems. Our study was funded entirely by the federal government and by national foundations. So you need to choose a place that is generalizable to other places. When you do longitudinal studies, you can't do multi-site studies. It's not feasible because it would just be too expensive. So Chicago works because it's a typical big city with typical big city problems. It has diverse Latino, diverse group of Latinos. So unlike San Diego, which would have mostly Mexican Americans, Miami, which would have mostly Cubans, we have a variety of Hispanic subgroups. And then we also had excellent cooperation. So how did the study work? We took a random sample.
What do you mean putting the mic a little closer to your mouth? There's having trouble hearing in the back.
Sure. I'm a bossy broad. Usually people don't complain that they can't hear me. So we took a random sample of youth as they entered detention. And we then interviewed them in detention. So independent interviewers that were employed by the project. And then we tracked and re-interviewed them wherever they lived when their interview was due. So this slide shows just the demographics of our sample, 1,829 kids, and we studied African Americans, Hispanics, and non-Hispanic whites. Those were the predominant racial groups. And of note, we oversampled non-Hispanic whites because otherwise we would not have had enough of them. You see very few, relatively few non-Hispanic whites in the detention center in Cook County and also in most major cities in the US. We also oversampled girls. We also oversampled younger youth, younger kids, and we also oversampled youth that were processed in juvenile court. So the mean age was around age 15. And then after we enrolled them, all 1,829 of them, we tracked and re-interviewed them wherever they lived when their interview was due. And that's key because if you lose people, for example, if you lose people when they become incarcerated, you lose the people that are most important to study. So Xavier actually worked on our project, and we went to great lengths to make sure that we retained our original participants. So I'm sure Xavier, like our other interviews, would walk up 8 flights of stairs, 8 flights of stairs in a housing project that would smell of urine just to get to our participant's apartment. We interviewed one participant on her break as an exotic dancer. We interviewed another participant in her boyfriend's garbage truck. He was a streets and sand worker, and he went on his break and had lunch, left his truck so that we could interview our participant in the truck. So we've tracked and re-interviewed them now for 15 years, and this is some of what we found. We looked at all types of psychiatric disorders. Depression, which of course was highly prevalent, anxiety disorders. The most prevalent disorder, and this is a disorder, not just use, was substance use disorders. So by 12 years after baseline, 90% of the sample had had a substance use disorder. And this means if it's a disorder, it's abuse or dependence. It's not just use. About 3/4 had an alcohol use disorder, and over 80% had a marijuana use disorder. This is an important slide because what this shows is the prevalence of disorder over time by type of drug. So what we see is alcohol use disorder is slightly less prevalent than marijuana, and the least prevalent are addictions to hard drugs. And this is fascinating because we have the stereotype of these kids who get involved in the juvenile justice system as using crack cocaine, being addicted to crack cocaine, using opiates, and in fact, that's not what happens. And that's the case for males, and it's also the case for females. Incarceration. We found that, and this is an especially bad news slide, this looks at the prevalence of any incarceration during adulthood for males and females. That's the top panel. And then for racial and ethnic groups among males and among females. And so we see that males are far more likely to be reincarcerated than females. And then among males, far more likely minorities will be incarcerated compared to non-Hispanic whites. We also looked at positive outcomes because we wanted to know what proportion of these kids just attained basic age-appropriate adult social outcomes. So for example, we looked at educational attainment, and we counted you as having attained that goal if you had a high school degree or equivalent. Gainful activity, we counted that as positive if you were either currently in school or employed 34 hours a week. Desistance, obviously quite important. Interpersonal functioning, parenting responsibility, that we counted that as positive if you had children, were caring for them, and they were not taken away by DCFS. Residential dependence, living independently, self-supporting, or with a partner. If you were incarcerated, then that didn't count. Major mental health, and then also looking at substance abuse. And the findings are quite depressing. So this looks at the proportion of our sample broken down by gender, males versus females, and race, non-Hispanic whites, Hispanics, African Americans, and what proportion of our sample achieved even 6 of these positive outcomes, even 6. Now, all of these outcomes, we set the bar so low so that most people would have attained those outcomes by the time they were 22 years old, by the time they were 3 years old. 12 years after detention, they were median age 32 years old. And I want to highlight the differences between males and females, that the females are far more likely to achieve at least 6 of these positive outcomes than the males. And among the males, there are distinct racial and ethnic differences. So fewer than 10% of African males achieved even 6 of those positive outcomes. Not even 10%. And this shows, and by the way, we have all of this in a journal article, so if any of you want to look at this in a little more detail, just send me an email and I'll be glad to send you the article. This was published in JAMA Pediatrics about 1.5 years ago. So this looks at the specific outcomes and racial and ethnic differences among males. I'm showing you males here especially because the racial and ethnic differences were so marked. So we see, for example, that for non-Hispanic whites, about 3/4 of them got a high school degree or equivalent, compared to only about half of the African Americans and Hispanic males. And so we see all of these differences. And so for most of these outcomes, the outcomes are much more likely to occur among non-Hispanic white males than among minority males. You can't read this slide. You used to be able to read this slide. This slide lists the deaths of our participants. And actually, it's out of date because every couple of weeks we hear about a new participant who has died. So this shows the deaths as of, about a month and a half ago of our participants. Remember that we had 1,829 people in our study, sampled when they were ages 10 to 17 in the late 90s. So a young group. And to date, 165 have died. And about half of those have died from homicide. And among those, most of them died from firearm homicide. So we think of these youth as being perps, but in fact, they often become victims. What I'd like to do now is turn it over to the other presenters because I have laid out more dire news. And the fact that so few of these youth, and especially the minority youth, do well following detention. It is like they get on an endless treadmill where they're arrested, they miss school, they go back to their homes, and they go back to their own school, don't do well, get disheartened, hang out on the street corner, get rearrested. It's just endless. I also want to emphasize that youth in the juvenile justice system are disproportionately poor, and of course minority, as I said. So guess how many youth in our sample of 1,800 in Cook County came from Wilmette, Winnetka, Glencoe, Highland Park? Guess. Zero. Zero. And that's because when kids at New Trier sell drugs or get into fights, the misbehavior is managed quite differently. They call the parents, they don't call the police. So I'm hoping that the subsequent speakers can shed some light on how we might address these issues. And thank you so much.
Actually, let's leave this up. So, hello everyone. If you didn't come to one of the sessions with Dr. Norcott and me, I'm Brad. It's nice to see you. Thank you for being here today. This is a great day. I've learned a lot. And I think we're going to use most of the time remaining for some discussion and questions, but I just wanted to say a little bit about some of the work that we're doing to try to address some of these issues. And this slide in particular is a good setup for me to talk about Healing Hurt People. Healing Hurt People Chicago is a hospital-based violence intervention program that works with young people who are injured by community violence. About 85% of our clients have been shot. We work at University of Chicago, Comer Children's Hospital, and now at the Adult Level 1 Trauma Center, which opened a year ago, and also at Stroger Hospital, Cook County, so Cook County Hospital in the trauma unit. So we meet patients when they are injured. This is one of the features of all the work that we're doing, whether it's Healing Hurt People or any of our other programs. We are not meeting people in traditional mental health types of settings. We are not working with people who are seeking mental health services. We are not working with people who are looking for help. Why? Because the people that we serve have learned from lots of experience that there's no point looking for help. It's not there, it's not provided to them, it's not for them. And a lot of our evidence-based interventions are not for them. They weren't designed for them. And so if they happen to get steered into that, they may have had the experience that, oh, well, that was, you know, they were nice, but it wasn't very helpful. So a lot of our research is done with people who sought help, right? What we're trying to do is offer support to people, not offer them mental health intervention, not offer them psychotherapy, offer them support to help them with everything they're dealing with. And so when we encounter people in the hospital, the purpose of that encounter initially is to provide some basic psychoeducation about trauma. These are some common reactions that people have after they've been shot. Sometimes people have these reactions, they feel like they're going crazy. It's not crazy, you're not crazy. If you start to have these kind of reactions, here's some things you can do to manage it. Here's how you can remind yourself that you're not crazy. Here's how can you remember where you are, when you are. We teach them how to do some breathing to calm themselves down. And then we also tell them about the services that are available. And some of them choose to have someone follow up with them. Then most of the work that's done is done by people with social work backgrounds. They're called trauma intervention specialists. They essentially have an intensive relationship with that individual. And the purpose of that relationship is to find out what all they're dealing with, what their goals are, and then try to figure out, okay, what can we do to help you stay safe and help you work towards these goals that you have for yourself. So it's different from a lot of programs where the goals are set forth in the purpose of the program, and that's, your goals are set for you. The judge told you to go there, and that's your goal. We try as much as possible to have those goals dictated by what our clients actually want for themselves. It's all self-selected. The core services are this kind of intensive case management, and then groups that are co-facilitated by some of our longer lasting clients who become peer leaders, mentors, and fortunately have not been locked up, sometimes thanks to Herschella and Michelle. Those are the core services of Healing Hurt People. We have found that we are able to, with people who stay involved with us for more than 6 months, they're probably going to stick for a very long time. And about 85% of those who have had 6 or more months in the program have not been re-injured, not sustained any violent injury while they're in the program. So we are trying to reduce the number of red names or red individuals on this slide. There are a couple other programs that we have that overlap with Healing Hurt People. And one is called the REACT program. It stands for Recovery and Empowerment After Community Trauma. That is hospital-based here at Comer Children's Hospital. And the purpose of that program is more traditional mental health kinds of services, more office-based. And we serve anyone who's been affected by community violence in any way. So basically that means we serve anyone, right? And so the services are trauma-informed psychological psychiatric needs assessment. Now, thanks to a gift that we just received, or the university received, we are able to provide ongoing therapy and medication management out of that clinic. We also have psychotherapy provider partners that work with us. All the services that people get through this program or Healing Hurt People are without fees. So we try to really remove all the barriers that exist to keep people from getting support and getting help. And so that's one example of that. Another example is that we provide transportation to and from appointments. And the way that we get clients is we have a social worker who wanders around the emergency room at Comer Children's Hospital and says hello to people. So we're not working with people who are seeking mental health services or seeking trauma recovery support. We're working with people who we know have very high likelihood of having been affected because of where we are and what's going on in our communities, and we just let them know these supports are available, and some of them say, oh yeah, that sounds good. The other program that is connected is called Project FIRE. This is the one that is the most, I guess, this is the one people like to talk about. Project FIRE. FIRE is Fearless Initiative for Recovery and Empowerment. It's a program that combines glass blowing, glass arts education, mentoring, trauma psychoeducation, and employment. And it's only for clients of Healing Hurt people. So everyone currently in Project FIRE has been shot. And so they are paid hourly to be in the hot shop, to make art, and to have trauma psychoeducation groups. And then they also can make money with their work. If they sell their work, they get 70% of the purchase price of their work. 30% goes back in to try to sustain the program, which is much higher than most arts venues would give. So that's a little bit about some of the things that we're doing. So I'm just going to leave with this, because this is really, and some of you who are in the workshops have seen this already. As far as next steps, what works? Where do we go from here? This is my answer to that question. Our children are given lots of messages about themselves, about who they are, about what's possible for them, about what their job in life is, about how long they're expected to be on the earth, about what we think about them, what their value is as humans. And so there's a lot that we have to try to counter, right? And so for me, these are the 5 key messages to support trauma recovery. So the real challenge for any of us who are doing work is to try to figure out, how do we create systems that will communicate these messages and other messages like them. This is the message that Herschella gave to Xavier the day she met him, right? There's everything on here. So how do we do that in our respective systems? So I'm going to leave with that, and then I'm going to turn over to Dr. Norcott.
He leaves me with the how.
No, probably you can sit at the mic if you want.
Well, I'm halfway here anyway. He leaves me with the how, right? Okay. The easy stuff. So I don't have any slides, and I'll just talk a little bit about who I am, my experience with what we've talked about, and also just then leave space for your comments and your questions, because you've heard a lot today, and give you space and time to react to that. So I moved to Chicago about 10 years ago, and I came from Connecticut, fresh out of graduate school, and I wanted experience with juvenile justice. I had been doing a lot of consulting with probation officers, and I was sick of the looks where people would say, what do you know, what do you know, right? And it was true, what did I know? And I think, how we would approach our criminal justice system if everyone was required to walk through our facilities, if everyone had to experience what happens behind the gates. So with that kind of privileged approach to my next step, I took a job at the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, and I was there for 3 years. And I have to say I was, had thought I had processed that experience until I heard Xavier speak, and speak with such descriptive detail about what happens and what happened back behind those walls. and it was really powerful. So thank you for that. And what I had been cultivating in graduate school and what I realized when I got there was that gender makes a difference. And gender makes a difference when you're working with people and when you're working with adolescents around criminal justice and juvenile justice. It's not criminal justice, it's juvenile justice. And is it really justice?
No.
And so I want to just start by who are the girls that I saw. So who are the girls? And the girls, when I first got to the detention center, were girls that were put there for status offenses. So nationally now there's been an effort to decrease the number of girls in our locked facilities and in our detention facilities for status offenses. So we've seen numbers drop kind of across the country. And so that's been great because they've been diverted to programs in the communities and potentially with the hopes that they'd get services in the community and not in a detention setting. So not be re-traumatized by settings like that. So we've seen numbers go down, and over the course of my time, I saw the 3 units at the JTDC go down to 1 unit, and sometimes there would be just a handful of girls there. Great. But then the girls that are there how are they looked at, right? And what's the label, and the girls that keep coming back, what do we say about them, and how do we treat them? And so there is the upside and the downside, so there's still some work to do when we think about girls. But when I think about the girls, it's the girls that are in our juvenile justice system have the same profile of the women that are in our criminal justice system. So if we're using the juvenile detention center as any sort of stopgap, speed bump on their way to adult jail, we are missing the boat, and we are not using that. And so I posed this question when we had our breakout sessions, and I'll pose it to everybody, but what do we really want to do with our adolescent justice system? Our juvenile justice system? Are we strictly there to punish them and to beat them down and to have control over them and exert and remind them who's boss? Or is it a place and an opportunity for healing and the facilitation of resilience and growth? And I think that that's a fundamental question that you should take back to your workplaces and ask yourself and ask the people that you work with on a consistent and regular basis. And so I would suggest that, because if the point is to punish, then we're doing a great job. And if the point is to send a message that there is no future for you, then we're doing an amazing job. And if the point is to send a message that you matter, you have a future, and this is a blip on the course of your life, then we are not sending that message. And I also talk a lot, and I talk in the breakout sessions a lot about, and I've come to cultivate and try to articulate this idea of macro versus micro. And sometimes when I'm talking to providers, and I talk to providers about getting overwhelmed and maintaining their own resilience, I talk about the being reflexive around macro and micro, and this ability that you have to develop to, when things and systems get overwhelming and too big, to go to the micro, which is what can I do for my body to keep myself resilient and healthy? What's the deep breath or the mini vacation or the grounding technique I can do so that I can build myself back up to do the big work? And when I think about systems, I think micro and macro also work. There's work that we need to do on a systems-wide level to think about services that we deliver to girls and boys. But then there's also the work that we need to deliver on an individual and relational level. A lot of the work I do with girls is about relational health. And what we know about sexual trauma and risk for victimization over the course of a girl's and a woman's lifetime is that her greatest risk of violence is from someone who's saying, I love you to her, and she's saying, I love you back. And so that's not better or worse than trauma that a boy or a man experiences, but it's unique and it's different. And we want girls to be relationally healthy and make good decisions, but we've confused and hijacked her ability to make relationships and to understand and fundamentally trust relationships. And so a lot of our programs are on mentoring. We have lots of mentoring programs, and we love that, right? We love, somebody did a study and they said that resilience is just that one person, and that is true, and that is great. And so then everyone's like, mentoring, 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 mentoring. So, but we are asking girls to create relationships, and we've never given her the skills to create healthy relationships. And so when she doesn't show up for her mentor, when she doesn't connect with her mentor, it's because she's difficult or has problems, right? And so really understanding what girls and you know, the people that are doing amazing work with boys and what they're bringing to the table is fundamental. So, you know, I bring that idea and this idea that gender matters when we're taking next steps. And I guess the thing that I'll just leave on is this idea again about macro and collaboration. When I moved to Chicago, one thing I noticed in addition to before I even got off the plane, people were saying, you know, Chicago's the most segregated city. And so, it's kind of they give you like a t-shirt that says that, and it's true. And it's very true. And part of what trauma does is it isolates and it separates. And recovery only can happen in relation and in connection. And that happens micro, right? It's that relation, and it happens macro, and we have to collaborate. Chicago, you know, when something's under so much stress, you get diamonds, right? I'm not gonna butcher the Tupac Shakur quote, right? But you when something's under immense stress, beautiful things can happen, and people can show and do amazing things. They shouldn't have to, but they can. And so I think Chicago is an example of that. Across this city, there are amazing people doing amazing things alone, under-resourced. And what would happen if we all worked together? And I say that to girls all the time. You can be your greatest enemy, they want you in competition, but what would happen if you really got together and worked as a force for the things that could ultimately work to your benefit? And so I just would leave that in thinking about, you know, yes, you're running for that grant, you're working to get a name for yourself and be a program and something that can give you notoriety within your system and within your institution. But what would happen if you reached out and you connected with somebody doing some similar work so that you can reach more areas of the city, right? What would happen if you facilitated or shared some of your resources and shared the stage and provided that? So in addition to what you take out with you, I want us to think about how we can take all of the amazing things that are happening in Chicago and put them together, kind of like a Voltron. I don't know, am I dating myself, right? But like, what if we could just all work together and just create this amazing force? And I think we can do it. And for our kids, we don't really have a choice. We have to. So, thanks.
Dr. Tevlin, you want to step up now? Sure. Questions, comments, anything before I pose questions? Do people feel better? Then let me just, because we still have a few minutes, let me just ask a couple of questions. And Dr. Norcott, I was struck by your, what would happen if we all got together and did this. What are, and I think you intimated some, but what do you think is the biggest impediment to that happening? That we all get together? Are we overly protective of our silos? I mean, everybody sort of knows that, you know, Northwestern and the University of Chicago, the law schools are competitive. We always win, but that said, you know, how is it? How do we show ourselves as adults in this fight?
I think something that is built in systemically is the way we fund programs. We make it a competition. And so when it's a competition, you get very protective over what monies are yours and what program you're doing so that somebody doesn't take your ideas. And I think it's just kind of an open market of ideas and resources. I mean, this is very aspirational and large, right? But I do think that the way we fund our programs drives that competition and the separation.
I would just piggyback on that what are the conditions that create all this violence, right? They are too many people competing for inadequate resources, and then we throw guns in, and a whole lot of other stuff too. When you have inadequate resources, then people are going to compete for them. They're going to fight over them. And that is how most of us who do this work, who do work that is in any way justice seeking, we are not adequately resourced. And so we compete. And so I talk to funders all the time about you should be funding collaboration. You should be funding people and saying, we're only going to give you money if you work together. But you have to fund that collaboration, right? Because that costs money. So I think that, we have worked together a little bit by necessity, right? I mean, our necessity, and you were nice enough to help. But that's not because the system is set up for us to work together.
I would like to add something that is quite a different point, which is the need for leadership by the feds, by the federal government, especially in early childhood education. What we have seen in our research is that it's not that we need to create jobs for these kids, we need to teach them to read, and that needs to happen when they're young. So we need systematic programs implemented by the federal government so that every child in the U.S. has opportunities to succeed. Because these programs are great, but they're about 12 to 14 years too late.
So why haven't we done that? Why haven't we taught every child in this country to read?
Because we don't value every child in this country. And also because I don't think this country really values education. The people who are glorified in our society are, athletes, and athletes are wonderful, there's nothing wrong with that. But that's who's making, the millions of dollars, and teachers who I think do the most important job in our society are struggling to, feed their families. So the kids who are valued in this society, who are not Black and brown children, are getting those kinds of educational resources. But as a society, they're not being evenly distributed. And I mean, we've seen that for years and it's still going on.
Xavier?
It's very interesting because the organization I work for, we work on the national level. We're being integrated in our state from year to year. And being an organization that's multi-pronged and policy and legal communications, that we would very much appreciate. So we need a multi-pronged organization.
What happened to the hand mic? Did we lose it?
I'll go for how about that? It's coming. I simply want to say that it's very interesting to see the difference working at one point with working in gang prevention, violence prevention, and then entering into the wonderful space of research with Dr. Linda Teplin, and being a part of the Northwestern Juvenile Project, having been in those spaces and seeing how, sadly, what you all described to me, in my mind, from my experience, really is like a gang rivalry amongst organizations. This is my territory. This is my client. This is my outcome. And so sadly, oftentimes, we see such divisiveness and division, and people who are working in the same spaces can't even look each other in the eyes, and it's sad. But what I'm witnessing on a national level in regards to where money is being funneled, is you see organizations like, we see entities like Open Society Foundation, Public Welfare Foundation, MacArthur, and others that are saying, if you do not work in a collaborative way, and if you are not specifically being led by directly impacted people and or informed by them, then you do not qualify for this grant. And so I'm waiting and excitingly just waiting for the day when those who are funding the local initiatives and work here on the ground hold these mandates to ensure that people are getting past this siloed work, to ensure that people who are directly impacted, who are close to the problem and close to solutions, have a voice and have a place at the table. So I'm really excited to think that someday that will happen, but I think with your all leadership, that can happen. Any
other comments? All right, let me just give you 2 minutes of my thoughts. And again, let me express my thanks to my students, to the Illinois Judicial Council, and to all of you again. I've met some new people, and I hope to talk to them too in the future. To all of my fellow workers, don't be looking at me like that, Carl Brown. Probation officers who are under-supported in lots of ways, let me say that, and I have come to the best of them, respect with all my heart. And to all of you who have expressed an interest in this and trying to make it better, I am gratified. I hope that we spent your Saturday productively for you. I know I learned some things, so I'm hoping that everybody had some part of that experience that I had, which is learning. One of the things that I heard in both the breakout sessions and in the panels, and that I alluded to when we opened this morning, again, is this sort of collaboration and this sort of coming together with our strengths to get the job done. Because what Brad does, and why I take your cases when you call me, is that I know that your work is important enough that for me to walk in a courtroom and bully a state's attorney will save you months with your client. So I don't mind doing it. So the notion of getting in where you fit in, I think is important, and that we should all sort of share that and the respect that we have for each other. I want to give you just some ending things. Please do your evaluations. Some of you, if you did not register, that means we don't have your email. Would you please leave your email on your way out so that, again, you can access any further readings and things that we have to share with you. There be no questions asked. No, this was free, so it's not like you stole anything. So leave us your emails. And let me say, this is going to be, we will do this again, IJC, I trust. But this will be, so I'm going to end this on a personal note, this will be the last time that Michelle Geller is going to be an active preparer and shaper of this symposium. She has been with us throughout the beginning. She is going to retire, which she has a right to do. But let me say, if anyone has any dirt on her that I can blackmail her into staying, please email me separately. But what she represents, I think, I know, to me, has been this sort of push towards reaching out in different ways at different levels to everybody. And there is a person in this audience that Michelle worked on his case, and this person is now free. We represented him on more than one occasion. All of the outcomes were not absolutely legally the best that we had hoped for, but it was the best that we could do. And he has said that Randolph Stone and I saved his life, but that Michelle Geller saved his soul. Thank you, Michelle.